approximately 78 witnesses that it indicated it was going to call, and it ended up calling approximately 15 of those witnesses. I think it's fair to say that the main thrust of the case for the state is to be seen in the evidence of the forensic pathologists, as well as the testimony of the handyman, Mr. Desmond Daniels. The testimony of all three of these witnesses is, of course, strongly disputed, as would have been apparent from the cross-examination of each of these witnesses. On a more peripheral level, the prosecution called various witnesses relating to the mental state or alleged absence of depression or suicidal risk on the part of the deceased. In that regard, I think of Mrs. Nader, the marriage guidance counsellor, Mrs. Newcomb, the psychologist, Dr. Steenkamp, the general medical practitioner. In addition to those, the state also presented the evidence of or called various other witnesses, and they can really be divided into three categories. The first category, experts. And they include engineers, blood spatter experts, fingerprint experts, DNA experts. Then the state called purely factual witnesses. And then lastly, the third category, South African Police Service related witnesses. Now, this is not an appropriate time or occasion to evaluate or attempt to assess or comment at any length on the credibility or the reliability of any of the witnesses called by the state. That will need to wait until the end of the case for the defense. But suffice it to say that insofar as the ordinary South African Police Service witnesses are concerned, and in particular the main investigating officer, his testimony is remarkable for the degree of mendacity and incompetence that he demonstrated. Not even to mention his obvious disinclination to record or present any testimony of an exculpatory nature vis-à-vis the accused. Another singular feature of this case is to be found in the surprising disappearance of much evidence that might potentially be vital to a just outcome of the case. Examples of that are to be found in the following. Number one, the removal from room 221 of the bathroom door by the investigating officer, despite having been expressly advised not to do so by one of the state's engineering experts, Captain Mofokong. Secondly, the disappearance while under the control and custody of the South African Police Services of the deceased's suitcase, her vanity case, her handbag, her wallet, her diary, and all the contents of those items. Thirdly, the inability of the state to produce, despite numerous requests, the original handwritten incident scene report of Dr. Khan. Next, fourth, the inability of the state to produce, despite numerous requests, the original autopsy handwritten notes of Dr. Khan. The same goes for the email exchanges between Dr. Khan and Dr. Abrams. The same goes for the original records of the mortuary reflecting when the case number was first allocated, and the same applies to the South African police records, not even to mention the strange disappearance of Captain September's pocketbook. Now, regarding the two forensic pathologists and their evidence, a lot will be spoken about them in due course, and the same applies to Mr. Daniels and his testimony. In presenting the case for the accused, it's my intention to commence by calling the evidence of the accused himself, Mr. Rohde. His evidence will firstly be of a general nature, setting out his background and that of his late wife, and then it will of course deal with the time of her death and the events thereafter. Following upon his testimony, it is hoped and planned that I will be able to call Dr. Reggie Perumal, the specialist forensic pathologist who performed the second autopsy on the deceased. Thereafter, I hope to be able to call, and I want to stress that I do not regard myself as bound to this list of witnesses. I hope to be able to call Professor Gert Simon and Dr. Isaac Loftus, two preeminent pathologists. Professor Simon is, I think, the most senior specialist forensic pathologist in government service in South Africa. Dr. Loftus, previously Professor Loftus, is a double specialist. He is both a forensic specialist pathologist and a specialist anatomical pathologist. They will comment, together with Dr. Perumal, on the content and quality of the autopsy examination and report as conducted by Dr. Khan, supposedly under the supervision of Dr. Abrams. In addition, certain factual witnesses will be called, and if circumstances dictate that it should be done, a further expert might be called. That is essentially what the case for the accused will comprise. When I was checking through the papers relating to this matter, with particular reference to the pre-trial procedures and the request for further particulars, I noted that one particular letter that was addressed by my instructing attorney to the prosecution following upon a pre-trial meeting with your ladyship did not appear at any stage to have been handed up to the court, and it should of course form part of the records. And unfortunately I omitted to bring a copy along today, but I shall provide that to the court tomorrow before the proceedings commence. Secondly, my learned friend has indicated to me that he does not dispute the contents of 3 affidavits that I handed up during the course of my cross-examination of various witnesses. And the affidavits have been marked as exhibits G1, H1, QQ, and RR. Then there is one final point. Shortly after my... As the court pleases. 4. Just for the record, G1, which is the affidavit of Angela Norton. H1, which is the affidavit of Diane Holmes. QQ, which is the affidavit of Mrs. Mavis Dingalibali, the switchboard operator at Spier Hotel. And RR, which is the affidavit of Mr. William Lee, an employee or an agent in the service of Sotheby's, who was attending the Congress. My lady, the last point that I beg leave of the court to make is the following. Earlier, when my learned friends, Mr. Pete Mahalik, Mr. Ross McKernan, and Advocate Webb withdrew from involvement in this case, Mr. Mahalik addressed the court. And I did indicate a day or two after that I would be touching on that address in my opening address. Reference was made therein to the reasons for the termination of my learned friend's mandate, and a particular reference was made to a potential conflict of interest and certain reasons which couldn't be disclosed because they were privileged. In case there's any misunderstanding in this regard, I wish to make it perfectly clear that insofar as there might have been any potential conflict of interest, this did not in any measure hinge on anything that was said or not said, or any conduct on the part of the accused. The mandate, the decision to terminate the mandate, was taken by the accused. As I see the case, my lady, the forensic pathologist, Dr. Khan, arrived at the alleged crime scene. He saw traces of blood in the bedroom. He saw a deceased person lying on her back in the bathroom. He observed what can only be described as extensive bruising to the inside of the thighs, particularly her left leg, but in fact on both legs. He made a crucial error in regard to his assessment of the deceased body's hypostasis, and concluded from that erroneously that the deceased could not have died in a hanging position. He made a fundamental error which has in fact been acknowledged, of something in the vicinity of 5.6 hours in assessing the accuracy of the time of death by concluding with a 95% probability that the deceased died at 5:40 that morning, when in actual fact the correct interpretation of the information which he had elicited was that there was a 95% probability that she had died at any time from 2.8 hours before 5:40 to 2.8 hours after 5:40. Taking all of these circumstances into account, it seems to me as if Dr. Khan made the fundamental error of prejudging the matter. That is one of the most basic and fundamental rules that forensic pathologists are taught, not to reach any conclusion, whether preliminary or otherwise, until you have all the facts. And the reason for that is that once one has made such a preliminary conclusion or reached it, it sets in motion a train of events which focuses one entirely on attempting to find or make findings that justify the conclusion. In other words, simply put, all objectivity goes out of the window. I believe that through the evidence which we will present, a more objective and truer, and the true position will be brought before this court, and that we will be able to demonstrate, in fact, on the probabilities that this patient, this deceased, was not strangled as alleged, but that she did in fact hang herself and committed suicide by doing that. My lady, with your leave then, may I call the first witness for the defense, and that is the accused himself.
Rohde? No, I don't. Yes, I do. So help me God. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, my lady. My lady, I believe that there is what is called live streaming of this testimony, to which we have no objection. I might just mention that at one point I will be dealing with the family connections of Mr. Rohde, and when we get to that point, maybe I can indicate beforehand so that the live streaming can be turned off, just for that portion of the evidence. Thank you. Now, Mr. Rohde, I want to start off by saying to you, please speak a little bit more loudly. When you took the oath now, it was difficult to hear you. And when you answer questions, please address the learned court.
That's fine.
Now, what is your date of birth?
10th of January 1969.
So how old does that make you now?
I'm 49 years old.
Where were you born?
I was born in Birmingham in the UK.
And when did you move to South Africa?
While I was an infant, I believe 2 or 3 years old.
Okay. And you moved to South Africa with your mother and your father?
My mother and my biological father, that's correct.
Right. Take us a little bit through the relationship between your mother and your biological father.
I don't really know a great deal. They got divorced when I was still an infant, and he moved back to the UK subsequently after that.
And did you have any further contact with your natural or biological father after that?
I had no further contact. My biological father's daughter reached out to me in early 2015, but outside of that, I've had no contact with him.
Did your mother remarry?
Yes, she did. She married Peter Rohde, who adopted me and who I now consider my father.
And when were you adopted?
I stand to be corrected, but I believe it was in 1975.
And where did you grow up in South Africa?
I grew up in Bryanston 3, which is on the border of Randburg, in Johannesburg.
What schools did you attend?
I attended Bryndale Primary and King Edward VII School in Johannesburg, where I was at boarding school.
Right. In what year did you matriculate?
I matriculated in 1987.
After matriculating, were you called up to do your compulsory national service?
Yes, I did. I was the last intake that did 2 years of national service.
And where did you do that?
I did that in Bloemfontein. I was stationed in Bloemfontein for most of my 2 years.
Right. And did you get any rank while you were in your military training?
Yes, I was selected to attend Panzer School, which is the officer training course, and I graduated as an NCO after my first year.
Right. So you completed your military training then for 2 years in 1989.
That's correct.
What did you do after that? In terms of further studies?
I enrolled for a BCom degree through an institution in Johannesburg by the name of Midrand Campus, which was an extension of UNISA, and I started studying towards a Bachelor of Commerce degree.
Right. When did you meet your late wife?
I met my late wife towards the end of 1989. We met at a party towards the end of 1989, so as I was finishing the army.
Did you complete your bachelor's degree?
No, I did not.
How far did you study?
I got to the equivalent of second year, I think it was.
Okay. And why didn't you complete your degree?
Because at the time, well, to be honest, I was pretty lazy, and academically I just wasn't motivated, and I got married on the 11th of December 1993, and straight after that Susan and I moved to Australia.
So you immigrated to Australia?
That's correct.
Just briefly, what motivated you to emigrate to Australia?
Susan's parents had moved to Australia for
Is
work.
that now Mr. Neville and Mrs.
That's right.
Diane Holmes?
That's correct. They had moved to Australia for work purposes, and back in those days there was a family reunion visa which allowed your extended family to join you in Australia. So on the back of that, Susan and I moved to Perth, Western Australia.
Prior to moving to Perth, and during the period when you were studying or still registered for your BCom degree, Did you work?
I did work. I worked for Mutual and Federal as a claims assistant, basically an administrative clerk job, the best way to describe it.
Was that during that period up till 93?
That is correct.
And when you moved to Australia, did you have employment in Australia?
No, I arrived unemployed, but I soon found a job, and I started working as a property consultant in Australia within a month or two of arriving in Australia in 1993.
Okay. And what is a property consultant, just for the record?
In Australia, what we used to do is I worked for a property development company where they would buy big parcels of land, they would subdivide those up and build show houses on them, and I was in essence one of the salesmen where we would sit in the show days, people would come in, we would show them various parcels of land, they would choose their land, we would then sit with them with the various draftsmen and design the homes that they wanted to build on that particular parcel of land. We would then take that, have it costed out in our costing department, put the package together, arrange the finance, and deliver them a home.
Right. Now, when you moved to Australia, did you take out Australian citizenship?
Yes, after a period of time, I think it was 4 years, you had to be in the country, I believe it was 4 years at that stage. You were granted Australian citizenship. So I took Australian citizenship. I wrote to the South African Home Affairs Department inquiring whether I could do that, and I got, both Susan and I got written permission back stating that we were allowed to have dual citizenship. So whenever I travelled in and out of Australia, I would have to produce that letter from the Department of Home Affairs allowing us to have that dual citizenship.
Right. So as such, you would really have qualified for a Great Britain passport, United Kingdom passport, a South African passport, and an Australian passport.
That's correct. I had all three passports. My Great Britain passport had expired. I hadn't renewed it, but when I handed my passports over, I had a British passport, which had expired, but my South African and my Australian passports were still valid.
Okay. Now, at some stage, you moved back to South Africa. Roughly when was that?
Round about end of 1997 or 1996. I cannot recall the year exactly.
Not terribly important. And when you came back to South Africa, first of all, why did you come back? And secondly, what did you do?
I came back to South Africa because I missed my home, I missed my friends. I enjoyed living in Australia, but it never felt like home for me, so I wanted to come back home.
And what did your late wife feel about that?
She was initially very reluctant. Obviously her family were there and they were a very close family, but she could see that I wasn't entirely happy in Australia. My brother-in-law, Peter Norton, had also moved back to South Africa. So we just decided collectively, Susan and I, that we would be moving back to South Africa.
And just for the record, your brother-in-law, Peter Norton, is married to your late wife's sister.
That's correct. He's married to Angela.
Right. And when you came back to South Africa, did you get employment? Did you work?
Yes, I did. I worked initially with my father. He was in a travel business for a while, but in conjunction with that, I started going back into the property business, where Susan and I were buying properties, renting them out, renovating them. So it was a combination of the two.
Did you at any stage establish your own business?
Not in early 2000s I established my own business. What I initially did in 1999, I joined a real estate company situated in Fourways in Johannesburg, where I was the manager of that business. And in 2002, myself and two other partners established our own real estate brokerage.
And that was called?
That was called Glasshouse Realty.
Right. And did that succeed? Was that a successful business?
Yes, it was a very successful business. In a very short period of time, we did very, very well. So yes, it was a successful business.
And did you carry on with that business?
We did carry on with that business. In 2005, I decided that looking forward strategically, it would be better for us if we joined with a large branded group. So in that regard, I approached Mr. Lou Geffen, who is the chairman of Sotheby's International Realty, and after lengthy discussions and negotiations, we concluded an agreement whereby Mr. Geffen would require 25% of our business, and in return we would be given the sole geographical rights for that particular area, for what we term the Johannesburg North area. So for all intents and purposes, we became a Sotheby's office for that particular geographical area, as with Mr. Geffen as a 25% partner.
And how did your involvement with Mr. Geffen develop into the future after that?
For the first couple of years, I ran the business. As I said, we were very fortunate. We were very fortunate in the personnel that we had. The business did well. And we had a very, very good relationship, a very sound relationship, a very honest, open working relationship between the parties.
And did you get any more involved with Sotheby's?
I was for all intents and purposes, the MD of our division, the Joburg North. But sometime in 2009, the acting CEO of the Geffen International Realty Franchises, which is the holding company for Sotheby's International Realty in South Africa, he left his position, and Mr. Geffen approached me to consider taking up the position as Chief Executive Officer for Sotheby's or Geffen International Realty Franchises in Southern Africa.
And did you accept that post?
Yes, I did accept that post.
Did that end your involvement in the Fourways franchise?
To a large extent, it did end my involvement. I would still have a hands-on role in the Fourways office, in the sense that I still manage the finances of that particular office, but that could be done digitally or electronically. So I was very hands-on from a financial perspective from that office, but I wasn't involved on a day-to-day operational basis within the Fourways office.
Right. And am I correct that you remained the CEO of Geffen International Realty Sotheby's until the time of your wife's death?
That is correct, yes.
And how did your tenure as Chief Executive Officer go? I mean, would you describe it as moderate, average, very successful? Give us an idea.
Well, being a chief executive of a large company is not an easy job. There's a lot of responsibility. But if you have to ask me how it went well. But like any business, we had our ups and we had our downs. But if I look over a track record, we were fortunate in the sense that, once again, we surrounded ourselves with very competent people, and the business, every year we made our targets, and we grew the business in very trying times.
Now, you mentioned having married your late wife, Susan, shortly before you left for Australia. And that was in, I think, at the end of 1993.
That is correct.
Give us some idea, please, of her and her background.
Susan was born in Middelburg,
Is that Middelburg Cape or Middelburg Transvaal?
Middelburg, Gauteng.
Gauteng, yeah.
She was born in Middelburg. She attended Bryanston High School. She was an exceptional athlete. 20 years after she left the school, she was still holding some of the running records. In her grade 10 or 11 year, I'm not quite sure, her parents had been posted to New Jersey, in the United States, and then she followed them and she finished her high school in the United States.
Yes.
From there she went to college, where she did I'm not quite sure what the term was, some type of undergrad psychology diploma or degree.
And no doubt she then at some stage after that returned to South Africa with her parents.
She didn't actually return with her parents. She returned on holiday. Her and her sister returned on holiday, and while she was on holiday, she met me. So that would have been in the end of 1989.
Okay.
And Angela, her sister, wanted to stay because she had already met Peter Norton, her now husband, and Susan decided to stay. So Neville and Di purchased a small apartment for Angela and Sue, where they could live in South Africa.
Where was that? In Johannesburg?
That was in Bryanston in Johannesburg.
Okay. Now, you married her in 1993. Now, lady, I'm now going to just deal briefly with the children in the marriage. Tell us about
in many ways, but we were also very similar in other ways.
Elaborate on that a little bit, please.
Well, Susan was an absolute perfectionist in everything she did. She was, if she set her mind to something, she was completely committed to that purpose. She would be completely single-minded in whatever she wanted to achieve in life. And unfortunately, I never had that same type of drive or dedication. So in that way, we were polar opposites. The way we dealt with various issues was also completely different. I tend to shy away from confrontation. Susan was a type of person that if she believed there was a problem, she had to get to the bottom of that problem.
Deal with it.
To deal with that problem, whereas I tended to wanted to look the other way most of the time and try and avoid things, hoping that they were going to go away.
Just as an aside, in terms of discipline towards your children, were you two very unanimous in your approach, or were you very different in your approach?
No, we were completely different. I certainly wasn't a disciplinarian within the house. My children always knew that they could get what they wanted from me, whereas Susan was the exact opposite of that. She was the complete disciplinarian in the house. That's not to say I couldn't get cross with my children. I certainly could, but I would always tend to give in, where Susan would stand on her principle on certain issues.
Right. Now, socially speaking, socializing, how did you and Susan feature in that field? I mean, you obviously must have had an ability to deal with people as an MD, not so.
Yes, I think on a social level, we both were very open to people. Susan had a wide variety of friends, a cross-section of friends. She had very good friends. I had a smaller group of friends. A lot of my friends go back to my school days and some of my close work colleagues, where Susan had a very wide group of friends, stretching from some of her friends going back to school to a lot of the friends she had made via our children when they were growing up, to the parents that you meet when your children are at high school. So she had a far wider cross-section of friends than I did.
And up till the time of her death, from a financial point of view, where did you and she stand in the sort of social hierarchy? Were you very well off? Did you spend a lot of money? Was it a very material relationship? Can you give us an idea?
I wouldn't say that we were not always financially very comfortable. When we got married, we had no money whatsoever. When we immigrated to Australia, we had no money whatsoever, and we had to build what we had from scratch. So it wasn't as if we ever inherited money or were given money. So I guess the best way to describe it is that we were financially comfortable. We weren't extravagant people. We lived in a nice house and we could afford nice things, but we didn't buy expensive jewelry or personally speaking, I don't think we were flashy people, but that's not to say we weren't financially comfortable I had a job that remunerated me relatively well, so that allowed us a certain degree of financial freedom. To be honest with you, we spent most of our money educating our children at the private schools.
Yeah. Let me just end my discussion of your marriage relationship with reference to the period up till and including 2015. Okay. What was the relationship between you and your wife in terms of conflict, possible abuse, I mean now verbal abuse, or physical abuse? Describe your relationship in those terms.
We had our ups and downs like any marriage would have. We could get into some awful verbal altercations with each other. I was as much to blame as Susan, so I'm not saying that I wasn't. I could be as bad verbally to Susan as she was to me, but never once ever did I ever physically attack, strangle, strike my wife, ever. As I said, I could be very verbally abusive when I lost my temper and I got cross, but I never, ever, once ever lifted a hand to my wife.
And just as a matter of interest, did she ever lift a hand to you?
She never lifted a hand to me, but the way of Susan dealing with issues was that if we had a confrontation or a disagreement, she would, if we were at home, for instance, we would try not to argue in front of the children. We would go to our bedroom or go to the lounge somewhere, and she wouldn't let you go until the argument. Well, there were two. I had two choices. Either I agreed, and I agreed. Very often I would either say sorry, or I would agree to Susan's side of the discussion, or I would leave. As a person, I don't like confrontation, not only in my marriage, but generally as a rule. I don't like confrontation. I try and avoid it, and it's just, anyone who knows me will tell you that I just don't like it.
And up to that period, was your relationship a placid one with the odd outburst, or was it generally a very stormy relationship?
We would go through periods where we could have months where it would be fine, and then for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's just the ebb and flow of marriage, I'm not sure why, but we would go through a very stormy patch in our relationship. I can't tell you why that would be.
What sort of things did you fight about?
We fought a lot about our children. I thought sometimes that Sue was pushing our kids a little bit hard, well, one daughter in particular, and we often had disagreements about that. And then other times it was just silly, mundane things that start small and then escalate into a major row about something which shouldn't have been a row. Susan, she liked to be able to have everything in set boxes in her life, and when I would step out of that parameter, so to speak, there would be a confrontation. So if you thought maybe that If I went out for a drink and I came home a bit late, there would be an argument about that. If she smelled smoke on me, I used to smoke sometimes and wash up. She didn't like me smoking, so if she smelled smoke on me, she didn't like that. So it was small, mundane little issues that tended to blow out. We had been for marriage counselling about 13 years prior, maybe 10 or 13 years prior to that. We were drifting apart, and Susan arranged the marriage counselling for us, and we went to marriage counselling, and we also did some sessions, some group sessions, which were meant to bring you closer together.
And was that therapy successful at the time?
I think it was, in the sense that I would see it for what it was, and maybe reflect on myself and say maybe I need to change. But if you're asking me, did we have, over our 23-year period, did we have a good marriage? I would say we did have a good marriage. We had our ups and our downs and our rockiness, but I can't stand here and tell you that I had a bad 23 years of marriage.
Physically, how did the two of you shape up to each other? Let me put it to you this way. How tall are you?
I think I'm 176.
1.76 m. And how tall was Susan?
Susan would have been about a centimetre or two shorter than me, so I put her about 174, I think.
And fitness-wise, were you very sporty and gymmy and that sort of thing?
I attended gym, yes. I did the half Ironman when I was 40 years old, but compared to Susan, no. Susan was a complete fitness fanatic. She watched what she ate. She could run. She was running 3-4 times a week. She attended gym on a regular basis. She had her own gym instructor. We had weights at home. She was very, very conscious of being fit and physically strong. And it wasn't just in later years of life. That's how she was from an early age. As long as I know her, she was very active.
Very fitness conscious.
Yes.
And strength-wise?
Susan was she was very fit. She was very strong. She for a lady, she was a very, very strong person.
What was her age when she died?
She was 47 years old.
And your age when she died?
47.
So you were the same age?
2 months older than her.
Right. Health-wise, what was your health like during your marriage? Were you a healthy person? Don't need any terrible details.
No, I'm a healthy person. I suffered once from kidney stones and I snapped my Achilles, but I'm a healthy person.
And Susan, was she a healthy person?
Susan was an exceptionally healthy person. I can't remember her ever lying in bed being sick.
Now we have it on record that she was a person who bruised extremely easily. Can you tell us about that, please?
I can't really comment on that other than just to reiterate what you said. I mean, it was anybody in the family who knew Susan knew that if she just knocked herself on the side of this table here, she would get a bruise. She bruised very, very easily. She always had bruises because she was always gymming and being very active, and she bruised particularly easy.
Okay.
And that was known throughout her whole family. I mean, it was a standard joke the way Susan, not a joke, but it was a common, everybody knew.
Now, in the course of 2015, let me go back one. Do you know Mrs. Jolene Altaskaya?
Yes, I do.
When did you meet her for the first time?
I met Jolene for the first time, it would have been round about 2013, I would have met her for the first time. She was working as a real estate agent for one of the Cape Town offices.
Yes. Can you elaborate on your relationship with her, please?
When I initially met her, or
Yes, well, did
when
anything
I
happen
when I
then?
initially met her in 2013, she was one of the hundreds of real estate brokers that we employed within the Sotheby's group. But in 2015, at the end of 2015, in June 2015, the end of June 2015, I had an occasion to attend a function. Well, it was more of a large dinner at a particular restaurant where Jolene was present there that evening, and I could say that is when I realized that I was attracted to Jolene.
Right. And what was it that made you realize that?
I can't pinpoint one variable to another. It's just that all I can say is that I felt physically attracted to Jolene at that particular evening.
Okay. And did anything come of that?
No, it didn't.
Did a relationship at any stage then develop between you and her?
Yes, it did.
Tell us about that in detail, please.
So soon after that evening, at the end of June of 2015, I messaged Jolene, messaged her obviously via my cell phone, and I then attended Cape Town. I'm not sure how long after that, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later after that, on a business trip where I invited her out for a drink, and we had a drink that evening when I was in Cape Town.
Just the two of you?
That's correct.
Right. And I take it that from then your relationship developed.
Our relationship developed on a physical level from, I could be wrong, either September or October of 2015. I'm not quite sure of the date, but on a physical level it was either September or October of 2015, that's correct.
And you're talking now about an intimate physical relationship.
An intimate physical relationship, that's correct.
And I take it that you had liaisons with her at various places and on various occasions.
That is correct, yes.
And no doubt you found as many excuses as you could find to visit Cape Town in that time.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, did your wife know about this?
No, she didn't know at all about it.
Okay. Not that you're aware of.
Had she known about it, she would have confronted me, so I could be wrong, but I doubt very much that she was aware of it.
And how long did this relationship continue with Mrs. Altaskaya?
The relationship continued up until the stage on I believe it was the 27th of February, where I had been to Cape Town. The 27th was a Saturday. I believe, and I'd been to Cape Town, and I got back on a Friday, and I had my bag with me, which I had traveled with. I used to have a carry-on bag, a pink carry-on bag, which I traveled with, and I had a Valentine's card in that bag, and Susan had unpacked that bag and found that Valentine's card in that bag.
Did you know it was there?
No, I wasn't aware it was there.
And who had put it there?
Jolene had put it there, obviously to surprise me, but I wasn't aware that that card was in that bag.
So she put the Valentine's card in your bag so that you would be pleasantly surprised when you unpacked your bag.
That's correct.
And instead your wife unpacked the bag.
That's right.
So was the 27th of February specified a year?
2016. 2016.
So, and just as a matter of interest, was it an anonymous card or did it say anything particularly suggestive?
It wasn't addressed from Jolene, but it was, I can't remember the exact wording of the card, but it was obvious to anybody that it wasn't a, how do I put this, it wasn't a secret Valentine's card. It was obviously coming from somebody who had intimate knowledge of me.
Right. You can't recall what it said.
I don't remember what the actual wording was exactly, but the wording was such that it was clear to Susan that the card was meant for me as opposed to somebody giving it to me anonymously.
Okay. And what was your wife's reaction?
She confronted me with a card. I remember I was in the study. I was doing some work in the study, and she confronted me with the card, and my initial reaction was I was obviously shocked and I was scared, and I tried to deny it, saying, oh, it's a anonymous card that I'd got, but after 20 minutes, half an hour, I realized that there was no point in denying it because I'd been caught, and I had to face the consequences. Correct.
And what were those consequences? Tell us all about the period from then onwards with you and your wife. What did she do? What did she say? What did you do? What did you say?
Well, on that morning, I remember Susan just went absolutely berserk. She was screaming, she was shouting. Obviously, I can understand. She was very, very upset. She couldn't believe that I would have done this to her after all these years. So I remember we went into the bathroom so the kids wouldn't hear us, and we closed the bathroom door, and we took my phone and we put it on speakerphone, and then she asked me to phone Jolene.
Did she ask you or did she compel you to? Or order you to?
Well, she told me to phone Jolene, which I did.
Stemming from the card, how was the connection made that it was from Jolene?
Because I admitted it was from Jolene. I initially had denied that it was from somebody, and then I admitted and I told her exactly who it was.
Was she familiar with some person called Jolene?
No, she wasn't. No. So we went into the bathroom and Susan said I must phone Jolene. So I phoned Jolene, it was on speakerphone, and I said to Jolene, Susan's here with me, and Susan's found the card, and I'm telling you that I cannot continue our relationship, and that I won't be contacting you anymore, and you mustn't contact me either. So it was a very short conversation that we had.
Did you decide what to say to her, or were you told what to say?
No, Susan had told me what I must say, and she wanted to hear it. That's why it was on speakerphone. She wanted to hear it for herself, what was being said.
Right.
And then, so that was a pretty short conversation.
And what did Mrs. Otiscar say? Did she?
She accepted it. She was obviously taken back that I'd made this phone call, but I think she could understand. I don't know if she knew or she was on speakerphone or not, I'm not sure, but I think she could understand the circumstances of what had happened.
Yes. Did you receive any communications from her?
Yes. And I don't know if it was that day or the next day, but I got a message from Jolene to say that she'd like to send me a letter, and could she send it? And at that time, Susan was keeping my phone. She was holding on to my phone, so I never had access to my phone. And Susan replied, yes, send it. And Jolene...
As if she were you.
Correct.
Right.
And Jolene sent a 3 or 4 page handwritten letter to me, which I received, and then Susan took that letter, read it, and then forwarded it to her phone and printed the letter out. And in fact, that is the letter that was found in my briefcase by Sergeant Apollos. Susan told me that I had to keep the letter on me at all times to remind me of just how dishonest I've been, and then she had made notes on the letter of questions that she had that she wanted me to answer.
You mentioned the word dishonest. How would you describe your conduct in terms of your marriage relationship and the fidelity that is associated with that, or expected?
My conduct is deceitful, shameful. When you're an adulterer, you live a double life. You're lying all the time. You are covering up after your tracks. You are ducking and diving. It goes hand in hand with being an adulterer.
How do you feel about your conduct?
My conduct has had it's ripped my family apart. It's devastated my family, and I know that if it wasn't for my disgusting behavior, Susan would still be alive today.
Other than communicating, as you've indicated, with Jolene Otiscar via your mobile phone, what other conduct did your late wife demonstrate after catching you out in this relationship?
What happened after I was caught was Susan she was so devastated from my deceitfulness and from my lying and my dishonesty, and that I can't put it into words, but it just consumed her. It just absolutely consumed Susan. And that she wouldn't sleep, she wouldn't eat, every single thing, she would go back into my diary and I'd have to explain everything to her. Every time she would phone me anywhere between 5 to 15 times a day. When I got home, I had to hand my phone in to Susan. It just absolutely consumed her. She wanted to know everything about Jolene, I know she was always on the Facebook looking at Jolene and looking at Jolene's family, and it was just we would have hours where it was fine, and then it would go from being fine, and then she would just completely explode again, and then it would be quietened down, and then completely explode again. It was just and the more Susan did that, the more I felt myself pulling away from her. It was like I knew that I should be. I knew that it was a time that I should be embracing her, but I actually felt myself pulling away from her, withdrawing from her, being emotionally distant from her.
Did she at any stage question you about matters relating to Jolene, such as where you'd gone with her, what you'd done with her, and that sort of thing?
Every single day I would, it was every single day it was, that's how we woke up and that's how we went to bed, talking about Jolene. It was just, she just couldn't get her head around how deceitful I had been to her.
Did she ever visit or speak to Jolene that you know of?
I know that she had phoned Jolene. I'm not sure of the content of the discussions, and I think she might have sent Jolene a message as well, but I'm not sure of the content of that.
As I understand it, at all relevant times, Jolene was based in Cape Town.
That's correct, yes.
Did your late wife ever visit Cape Town in connection with this affair of yours?
Yes, she did. A day or two after I was caught with the Valentine's card, I remember I was at Tasha's having a breakfast meeting, and I got 2 or 3 missed calls from Susan, and I answered my phone, and she told me that she was driving to Cape Town, to Joburg International Airport, and she was climbing on a plane, and she was flying down there, and she was going to go and confront Jolene in her office.
And what was your response?
I was terrified, to be honest. I from a purely selfish perspective, I just pictured Susan walking into our offices and having this physical confrontation with Jolene in our office, and the repercussions, from a company perspective, would have been very, very embarrassing for me.
And did she, in fact, confront Jolene personally or physically?
No, she didn't. She went down there. I immediately left the breakfast meeting, and I went to my car, and I was talking to her, and I said, please, Sue, come back, because she hadn't packed her bag or anything. She just had decided. She just climbed into her motor car and she drove there, and she booked a flight when she arrived at the airport, and she flew down there, and then she phoned me when she landed, and I remember she told me that she went and bought a cell phone charger from the airport, and then she made me explain to all the different places that I'd taken Jolene to. All the restaurants, if I'd been on a beach with her, for instance, and then she would take pictures of the beach, for instance, and send it to me. I remember she stood outside the Sotheby's office in Sea Point and took a picture of that and sent it to me. I told Sue that I bought Jolene a Superdry t-shirt, and she went to Superdry shop and she bought a Superdry t-shirt, and she sent me a picture of herself in the Superdry t-shirt while she was in the Uber. And then she stayed there that evening, and she flew back. She went to Woolies to buy some underwear, and then she flew back the next morning.
Right. Now, lady, is this a convenient time to adjourn for tea?
For 10, 15 minutes, just to know my availability. I'm free to sit during lunch. I have to adjourn. I'm not available after lunch. So perhaps by between your lunch moment, we can have a discussion as to how much
Now, lady, I hope it comes as a blessing in disguise for me. My motor car broke down, and I have to go and collect it. So thank you for that.